So welcome to this new series called Looking for the Upside, where we're going to try and cut through the current doom and gloom and highlight some of the big themes that are unfolding behind all of the noise. Now, in the past year or so, inflation has been central to the misery for consumers and, of course, markets. And besides commodities, which have seen a pretty big correction of late, there have been only a few beneficiaries. But today, we're going to explore another real asset that I know a number of you have been keen to learn more about, myself included, and that's farmland. I'm joined today by Sven Miserey, who has become something of an expert in this field in the last few years. So Sven, thank you. Welcome, first of all, and thank you for joining us. I know it's been a few years since you and I actually last got together over in, I think it was Vilnius, Lithuania, wasn't it?
Vilnius almost 10 years ago, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Good to see you again, James.
Likewise. I know a lot's probably moved on for us both in that time. And certainly in the last few years, you've been ploughing your furrow, so to speak, in farmland. So maybe you could just talk a little bit, as in a brief intro, about what's captured your interest in this area and how have you got into it?
Well, James, it's one of those important things where the theme of water has been one of the predominant themes that you hear about. Would it be because of climate change, but would you also hear about scarcity of water and the importance of water in a growing population worldwide? And I started looking at the asset class and realized that you had three ways of accessing it. One, which was hydroelectricity. One second one, which was bottled water for mineral water. And the third one, which was distributing and recovering and cleaning water for utilities. None of these have anything to do with the water. It's not a question of scarcity. It's a service that you're providing on top of it. And it's linked to the price of energy. It's linked to, the inflation inside of services to the public, or it's marketing. And the only real asset that deals with producing an income every year is agriculture. And that's how it all started.
I see. So we're talking about water scarcity and being able to source that, which clearly, with climate change and all the increased awareness around that at the moment, we're seeing things happen in the real world. I'm sure that you've got some anecdotes as well, having looked at how farmland and arable land is changing around the world. We begin then with water. That's the passion. That's the theme. How has your journey sort of evolved from an investment standpoint in this sector? So
the first thing that happens is, if you're buying a real asset, you have to understand where you're buying and what you're buying. So the first thing about where, the real question of where has to do with land registry and courts of justice that allow you to enforce your title. Then after that, contracts with the operators that are going to be farming your land, and the courts of justice that have to be independent to deal with that contract.
Okay, so this is presumably if we're jetting, well, maybe not jetting around the world destroying the climate, but if we're traveling around and going to, I don't know, New Zealand or California.
Indeed.
Or wherever.
So the Anglo-Saxon legal framework is one that has stood the test of time. But you do have a number of countries. But out of the multitude of countries on this planet, you only have about 20 countries or 25 countries that really make sense when you take all those. So that's the first funnel. Then the second funnel has to come back to the original theme, which is water. And when we're talking about this water, we want to make sure that we have naturally replenishing water. And that happens in three ways. The first is obviously, if ever you are in a subtropical area, where 6 months of the year you'll have plenty water, which you can store and then use for the other 6 months of the year. The second one is when you are in an area that has a lot of windswept rain coming in.
So, a bit like Yorkshire, where I'm from.
Indeed, but you can also look at places like Tasmania in the south of Australia, where you won't necessarily have a lot of sun, but you'll have grass that's going to be growing plenty. And then that you can transform into free grazing cattle, either for the meat or for carbon neutral dairy, which is part of the themes. And the third one is at the bottom of mountain ranges that are downwind from a body of water. So that's typically Northern California at the foothills of the Rockies, where you have all the water that comes from the Pacific Ocean, dumps on the mountains, and then either snow or rain, and then collects at the bottom of the valley, which means that you have plenty of water. So that naturally replenishes the water source. And we come back to the original theme of water. Every other aspect of agriculture is one in which you're dependent upon the right amount of sun, the right amount of rain at the right time in order to be able to produce something which is commoditized. And these commoditized farmlands have a utility, also have some inflation hedging inside of them. But you're a price taker on the inputs, and you're a price taker on the yield and the price of your output.
So what sort of examples are we talking? Is it things like
corn,
cotton,
soy, wheat are typically what we're talking about there. And that's what you've been able to access most of the time already in financial markets by companies that do this and are investing in this. Our focus has been really to go to that universe of water-rich, naturally replenishing, non-commoditized crop being produced by the land that we're looking at.
Yeah, because presumably you don't want to be a price taker in that business. You want to have the margins and more control, not be as vulnerable to the weather,
absolutely,
as you mentioned, which is obviously changeable.
And one of the advantages of that is because you are in those areas where you have a lot of water, instead of producing these commoditized crops, you're going to be producing high nutrition crops. High nutrition crops have a double advantage. The first one is there's a growing part of the world population, which is close to 2.5 billion today and growing to about 4 or 5 billion in the next 20 years, that have more than $10 a day to feed themselves.
So this is like the expanding middle class.
This expanding middle class. And these people have enough money to buy food that's good for them. Not to mention it also ties in with governments that are looking more and more at good nutrition as a stalwart of long-term longevity and quality of life for people in the countries.
So when, sorry Sven, to just interject, so when we're talking about these high nutrition foods, what are we talking, like nuts and seeds?
We're talking about vegetables, we're talking about fruits, and we're talking about nuts and this free grazing cattle, either for the meat or for the so
it's not this intensive farming and all that commoditized stuff. It's, I don't know, I guess all the health foods that they tell me to eat and free range stuff.
Yeah, and you're getting this high nutrition, which is good for the people that are eating it downstream. You're also not draining the land from its resources because you've got enough resources. You've got enough water coming in. And that means that you can do sustainable farming in a much easier way because you don't have to stress the land and the topsoil, which is the second part of the asset that you're buying. You're buying the water in a geographical plot, but you're also buying the topsoil. And the topsoil is what you really want to keep alive because that's your long-term asset.
Isn't that one of the fears as well that's going around? Is it across the Midwest or, technically, obviously, I'm no expert in commodities and in farming, but isn't it the fear that like soil erosion and things like that are making it hard for presumably the old methods of farming or the conventional ones where we're just trying to maximize yield out of the same land, as opposed to this method or these techniques? Is that presumably a threat to the old model as opposed to the new one? Or?
I think you've put the finger on the pulse. The change, the 70s, 80s, and 90s were all about more. But more came from more inputs also. So you'd have a tractor that would dig deeper because the topsoil was being eroded. And you would make sure that you would kill all the weeds. The weeds keep the topsoil from eroding from wind and from water. So there is a value to that weeding, but there's also a value of having some protection to your topsoil. It's also a question of putting more pesticides, more fertilizers inside of the land, optimizing the yield output of consumable material out of the crop. So on a stalk of wheat, how many grams of can you manage to get out? All of that is now going towards less. And so you're trying to put water where it's needed. You're trying to put pesticides where they're needed and when they're needed. And the same thing with fertilizers. You're not blanket covering on a schedule anymore. You are trying to get AgTech to help you determine that you need to put inputs at one point of time or another. So even in the Midwest, which is commoditized crop, you are seeing an improvement in the sustainability of farming that is being brought by AgTech, but also the mentalities.
We hope you enjoyed the video. At Real Vision, we help you understand the complex world of finance, business, and the global economy with in-depth analysis from real experts. Join the revolution at realvision.com.